The slaver corridor reeked of heat-sick metal, old blood, and recycled despair. The auction was over, its final calls long since barked out and silenced. No crowd remained, only a few vendors breaking down their stalls and sealing crates, muttering curses over empty slates. Sun lamps, set to dusk mode, bathed the steel walk in rust-red haze as artificial twilight clung to the corners like soot. The air too hot, too stale stuck to Corin Vale's collar as he stepped into the corridor from the side alley. He shouldn't have been here. The route was faster. Yes, cutting through Zareth Square shaved 10 minutes off his walk to Sector 8, but most knew better than to pass through the auction zone after cycle shift. Corin had always known better. And yet, here he was, soaked with coolant sweat from a failed intake bypass, his work boots sloshing faintly from the leak that had eaten through his socks, fingers crusted with dried gel from patching seals alone. He didn't even realize he'd stopped, walking until he blinked and noticed the cages. They lined the walls like discarded server racks open, clanging gently in the shifting air, some already unbolted from their tethers, others with straps dangling, limp across blood-stained mesh. There was no motion in them. Every door swung open except one. One cage remained shut. Corin stared at it. His breath slowed. He didn't know why he cared, why his boots held ground rather than pushing forward. He just knew that something in that locked shape at the end of the corridor demanded stillness. She sat motionless inside, back pressed against the rear panel, knees drawn up. One arm looped loosely around her legs, the other splayed across the floor for balance. Her skin, muted blue beneath layers of dirt and grime, shimmered faintly in the half-light, not shine glow. Subtle tracery just beneath the surface. Biolites, maybe, or something deeper. A kind of living circuitry that flickered in and out. With her heartbeat, she wasn't shaking. She wasn't hunched. She wasn't crying. Corin had seen enough cage girls to know the patterns. The pleading, the bracing, the bone-rattled fear that lived in their eyes even after they were claimed. But she wasn't like them. She was silent, not the silence of someone broken, but the silence of someone waiting. Her wrap, what was left of it, was ceremonial. Torn silk, stained and pulled tight across one shoulder, exposing one long, bruised thigh and a collarbone scuffed raw. She had no shoes. Her ankles were swollen from restraints. Her hair was silver and gold, matted behind her neck, tied with a torn strip of cloth. Corin swallowed hard. Something ancient stirred in his gut. Not lust. Not pity. Recognition. And then she looked at him. Eyes like hammered gold clear ringed, with deeper amber at the edges. Not wide, not pleading, just watching. A moment passed, then another. She inhaled, held it, didn't look away. Corin didn't remember telling his feet to move. But he was closer now, closer to the cage door. The vendor packing up crates nearby barely looked at him. He didn't know what he was doing, only that he couldn't leave her like this. "I'll take her," he said, quiet, measured. The vendor paused, looked up, squinted. "What?" Corin's voice came steadier the second time. "I said I'll take her." "No tag on that one," the man grunted, wiping his hands on a grease-stained tarp. "Late delivery. Didn't beg, didn't cry. Folks want pliable." "She's been sitting there 6 hours. Most didn't notice." "Didn't want to." Corin didn't answer. He pulled out his ident tab, pressed the credit node. The transaction registered. With a soft beep. "No returns," the vendor muttered. "You get her, she's yours." A soft hiss sounded as the cage door unsealed. She didn't move. He didn't reach for her. Just stepped back. Let her choose. Her gaze didn't leave his face as she shifted. Her knees moved first, then her arms. She stood slowly, her body controlled, steady, despite the stiffness in her limbs. The wrap slipped a little. She didn't fix it. She stepped forward, barefoot, one leg at a time over the cage's lip. Dot and walked beside him. Dot, no words, no gratitude, no question. Corin kept his pace steady, heart knocking against his ribs in a rhythm he didn't recognize. They passed through the empty corridor like ghosts, him and the woman from the last cage, into a world that hadn't made space for either of them. Not until now. He didn't look back, and she didn't look away. Asterisk, the apartment was nothing. Concrete and carbon panels stacked in prefabricated fatigue. No AI cores, no wall displays. Just a steel counter, a creaky vent above the stove, and a sleeping mat he never bothered replacing. He didn't bring people here. He didn't want to. Until now. Corin keyed the lock with his palm. The door hissed open on weak hydraulics, and stale air met his face, faintly metallic from days of recycled flow. She stepped in behind him without needing a word. She didn't ask where she should go, just paused in the center of the room, taking. In the scuffed floor, the blinking power node above the wash station, the folded towel he kept near the sink. Then her eyes moved slowly to the thin mat against the far wall. He nodded toward it. You can rest there. I'll get you food. She didn't sit right away. Just walked toward the mat, still barefoot, still silent. Her steps didn't make noise, only the fabric of her wrap whispering against her thighs. She lowered herself cross-legged onto the mat in one smooth motion and sat straight-spine tall, gazed down, hands on her knees, like she had already measured the space and found it neutral. He turned to the kitchen, opened a packet of synth broth, thickened it with powdered starch, set it to boil. Every movement felt louder than it should have. He wasn't used to being watched, but she didn't seem like she was watching. More like she was present, waiting for something to reveal itself. He placed the steaming bowl near her on the floor and sat back, his body braced awkwardly against the low bench by the wall. His arms were crossed. His shirt clung with old sweat, still damp under the collar. He didn't change. He didn't speak. She looked at the food. Not suspiciously, not gratefully, just assessed it. Then her eyes lifted and met his. They sat in the quiet. No buzz of commerce, no clanging of cages, only the dull hum of the water recycler in the wall. Her gaze was even. Not searching for meaning, just letting him see. And he did. The faint glow under her skin was a little brighter now. The bruises showed clearer, too, as if the heat and lighting drew them out. A mark under her rib, thin burns near the elbow. Her wrists were red, where restraints had bit too long. But she sat tall. He shifted, unsure if it was better to speak or not. Finally, he cleared his throat and nudged the tray closer. It's hot. Filtered water, synthetic protein. Nothing fancy, but it's clean. I boiled it myself. She didn't nod, but she moved. Reached with one hand slowly, deliberately, and lifted the cup. Her grip was careful, not clumsy, but cautious. Like she wasn't used to things not being taken from her. She drank, a few sips. Swallowed. No visible change in expression. Gee. Set the cup back down. Corin exhaled through his nose. Some tension left his shoulders, but not all. He didn't expect thanks. He hadn't done it for that. Still, her silence felt deliberate, not defiant. Like she needed to own it. I'm not going to touch you, he said quietly. I didn't take you for that. She looked up slowly. I didn't buy you. There was no price. You were just there, and I couldn't walk past you. She blinked once. Her chest rose, slow and deep. And she said it. Why? The word was hoarse, raw from disuse. Not whispered like it held fear spoken, like it demanded truth. Corin blinked. The edges of his throat, caught on something he didn't have a name. I don't know, he said. Maybe because you didn't look like you'd ask. Maybe because no one else did. Maybe because I've spent years pretending not to see people that don't ask. Her gaze stayed on his face, unmoved, unjudging, just listening. He stood, slowly, and crossed the room to the drawer by the sink, pulled out a folded synth blanket and set it gently on the edge of the mat. You can stay. You don't owe me anything. Not food, not warmth, not words. She looked down at the blanket, then back at him. Her lips parted. I'm Aras. She said it simply, like an offering. A name not spoken in years. Corin nodded. Corin. And in that moment, no fanfare, no gesture. They were no longer stranger and captive. They were two people in a room that wasn't built for either of them, both finally choosing not to be alone. He sat back on the bench, the hum of the building, soft around them, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was hers. It was his. It was theirs. Asterisk, the days didn't follow a pattern, not yet. There were no rituals, no rules, just space, and two people cautiously learning the shape of it. Corin left for work before sunrise, as always. He said little before leaving, only that the water was clean and the lock on the door had a manual. Override. She didn't respond. Didn't need to. When he returned that night, she was still there. Aras sat cross-legged on the mat, legs bare, shoulders draped in the same blanket he'd offered. She hadn't unpacked anything, because she had nothing to unpack. But the room had changed. The vent near the ceiling no longer rattled. The sink didn't leak. The heater, long sputtering with a dying filament, hummed low and steady. She had fixed them, quietly, with parts from his supply drawer. She didn't ask permission. Corin dropped his work satchel by the wall and toed off his boots. His fingers ached from tightening seals and recalibrating intake valves in sub-zero tunnels. But the warmth inside the apartment faint, even felt. Different now. She glanced at him once, then turned back to whatever she had been doing. The only sound was the quiet scrape of a cloth over the floor. She had cleaned that too. Asterisk. He stepped into the kitchenette and ran the water. It came out smooth, not staggered. He blinked. She didn't mention it. But he knew. You fixed the filter node, he said. I watched you work on it last week, she replied. Her voice was low, even. You didn't calibrate the fuse grid. He nodded once, slowly. You learn fast, I observe. He poured himself a cup of the bitter ration tea and turned around. She was facing him now, sitting on her heels, posture still formal, but less guarded. That's not the same as trust, he added. No, she agreed. It's not. He didn't push further, just leaned against the counter, cup in hand, watching her without pressing. A long silence passed. Then she asked, Do you always eat alone? His fingers curled slightly around the cup. Usually. I didn't eat in the dorms, she said, before the auction. Just ration bars. Quick ones. He nodded. Transport unit? She nodded back. Internal logistics. I was assigned. At 17. Supposed to be bonded before 22. What happened? She looked at the floor. My papers were never processed. When the station was decommissioned, they sold the bodies marked as non-functional. Corin's stomach turned. But he didn't let it show. And no one checked. There was no one left to check. A silence settled again. He hated it. Not because it was awkward, but because it was familiar. You ever try to leave? He asked. There's nowhere to go, she said. If you don't exist on a manifest. He exhaled, long and slow. She understood something he had never spoken aloud. She knew what it felt like to vanish, even while breathing. She stood and moved past him, brushing his sleeve, not with force. Just contact. deliberate. She crossed the room and sat on the bench where he usually read, legs drawn halfway up, arms around her knees. He followed, sat across from her on the bed, elbows on his thighs. Then she asked it, quiet, playing, "Do you think I'll sleep with you?" Corin didn't flinch, but the words hit. Not because he was offended, because she said it without fear. "No," he said. "I think you've been touched too much already." Aros watched him. Her golden eyes didn't waver. Then she said, "That's why I sat here tonight. I wanted to see if you'd ask." He met her gaze. Steady. "Would it change anything if I did?" "Yes." "How?" "I'd leave." He nodded, accepting it without defense. Then she rose slowly from the bench and walked toward the kitchen, pulled the remaining tea from the kettle, and poured him another cup. Their fingers touched as she handed it over. No flinch. No retreat. She said nothing else. But she didn't return to the mat dot. Instead, she sat beside him, shoulder, brushing his on the edge of the bed. They stared at the blank wall, sipping tea, letting the quiet settle around them like a shield. A quiet neither of them tried to fill. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was the first time she chose to stay beside him. And that choice, Corin knew, was heavier than any vow. Asterisk, the apartment didn't feel different. Not in any way you could name. The air was still too dry, the walls still scuffed with years of breathless routine. The same cracked ceiling panels blinked dull overhead. The same wiring still poked from beneath the wall plates in the kitchenette. But Corin noticed it the moment he stepped through the door. Something had changed. The lights were dimmed to just the level he preferred, warm, not blinding. The heater hummed evenly, a sign she'd fine-tuned the oscillation unit again. Space smelled faintly of tea and steam. Not food, not perfume. Just warmth. He set down his satchel slowly. The end of shift still clung to his sleeve's coolant spray. Dry grit. Old insulation dust. She was standing by the window, her back to him, barefoot. A long work shirt hung off her shoulders, his shirt unbuttoned, as sleeves rolled up to her elbows. It reached to her thighs, modest but loose. Her ceremonial wrap was folded neatly over the back of the bench. Her hair, silver and gold, was damp and clung in strands down her spine, leaving a dark trail on the cotton. She hadn't spoken. Neither had he. He watched her for a long moment. "I didn't think you'd still be standing," he said, his voice low from fatigue. She didn't turn. "I've been here an hour. You didn't have to. I know." He moved to the sink, opened the drawer, and pulled out 2 cups. The kettle was already warm. She turned just enough to see him and poured the last of the steeped water into both mugs. No offer, no hesitation, just quiet familiarity. She handed him one. Their fingers brushed again. No flinch. No apology. He took a sip, nodded slightly, then leaned against the counter. She resumed, stirring a sealed ration pack over the hot plate. "I've been watching how you eat," she said, without facing him. "You chew too fast. I eat between alarms." "Still," she said. He blinked, almost smiled. They ate together. At the bench this time, knees brushing. She moved slowly, carefully, like she was measuring the table for the shape of something new. When she finished, she slid her bowl across to his tray. "I'll wash both," he said. "I know." She moved to the bed. Didn't lie down, just sat cross-legged, arms around her knees, blanket around her shoulders. He cleaned the dishes in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because silence didn't feel like a threat anymore. When he turned, she was watching him. "You can sleep if you're tired," he offered. "I'm not tired." He nodded, unsure what to do with that. "Do you want the room to yourself?" "No." She shifted the blanket slightly, then reached out, not far. Just far enough to touch the edge of his sleeve with her fingertips. It wasn't invitation. It wasn't defense. It was a statement. I don't fear this. His chest tightened. He didn't move. I thought about leaving today, she said softly, eyes down. Not far, just to feel if I could. You can, he replied gently. You always could. I didn't. Why not? Because the silence out there, she said, feels heavier than the silence in here. He sat down beside her. Not touching. Not quite. She shifted slightly, then leaned in, slow, steady, until her head came to rest just beneath his shoulder. Her breath was warm. Her body trembled faintly, not from cold, but from whatever it took to allow this closeness. He didn't move. Is this wrong? She asked. No, he said. It's just been a long time. She nodded once against him. They sat like that for a long time, breath sinking without effort. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Then came the words quiet, but whole. Touch. My back. Just once. Corin froze. She added, not for sex. Not for anything. Just because I want to feel someone's hand, without a reason behind it. He moved slowly, placing one hand gently between her shoulder blades. Her skin was warm through the fabric. He didn't stroke, didn't press, just rested there, grounded and still. Aras exhaled. Her shoulders softened. That night she took the bed, not with request, not with caution, just with choice. He didn't join her, but sometime in the hours before dawn, when the heater cycled off and the air grew colder, her hand reached out across the blanket, found his where he lay curled on the bench, and she held it. He didn't speak. He didn't let go. And neither of them dreamed of cages again. Corin woke slowly. Not to an alarm. Not to the thrum of distant machinery or the shriek of ventilation pressure warnings. Just the quiet shift of filtered morning light washing pale across the concrete walls. The heater was still humming soft, steady. The air smelled faintly of her skin and tea from the night before. He didn't move at first. Her fingers were still loosely wrapped around his hand, warm beneath the edge of the blanket that stretched across the narrow gap between the bench and the bed. She hadn't pulled away. Neither had he. When he finally sat up, careful not to break the contact too suddenly, her fingers released his without tension. She was awake. He could feel it. Aras turned toward him, her hair mussed from sleep, half curled around her shoulder. The shirt she wore, his shirt, had slid slightly off one collarbone, revealing the soft blue skin beneath, unmarred now, except for a faint scar near the edge of her shoulder. You didn't leave the bed, she said, her voice still rough. With sleep, no, he replied. You didn't ask me to. She nodded. A slow, deliberate movement. Then shifted upright, pulling her knees up and wrapping the blanket around her legs. She didn't avert her eyes. She just watched him like she was still trying to map him. Out one morning at a time. I'm not leaving, she said. He believed her. They didn't rush the day. There was no schedule, no shift waiting. For once, Corin had taken a day off not requested, just claimed. He'd marked himself unavailable. No one had questioned it. They ate together at the bench. She boiled the starch packet this time. Fumbled. The portioning, spilled a bit of broth on the counter, laughed under her breath when she tried to clean it up with the wrong towel. Corin stared for a second. She'd laughed. Not loud. Not forced. Just a quiet sound that slipped out from somewhere, deeper than reflex, and he had smiled. They sat together long after the meal. Aras folded the blanket neatly. She didn't return to the mat. Not once. The bench was theirs now. The space between them smaller, unspoken. Then she turned to him, hands folded on her lap, her posture formal again, but her gaze softer than before. Do you still want me here? She asked. Corin looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were brighter today. Her skin glowed more cleanly, the lines of internal light beneath it pulsing in soft rhythm. The bruises had faded. The stiffness in her spine had eased. She looked more like someone who lived here, not someone who was hiding. You already know. The answer, he said. I want to hear it. Yes, he said. I want you here. She looked down, then slowly turned her hands over, palms up, like she wasn't sure what to do with them. I don't know what I'm supposed to be now, she said. I'm not crew. I'm not bonded. I'm not property. I don't even know if I'm a guest. You're not property, he said firmly. And I don't want a guest. Then what am I? He sat in silence for a long moment. Then finally, he said, You're someone I'd miss if you weren't here. Aras didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed. That same invisible armor she always wore, made of silence and wariness and terrible memory, seemed to melt just slightly. She reached out and touched his forearm, lightly at first, then firmer. Her fingers traced the seam of his sleeve, stopping at his wrist. I don't need to be saved, she whispered. I'm not here to save you, he replied. Then why do you keep making space for me? He looked at her, unblinking. Because I want you to choose to stay. She leaned in, slower this time, until her forehead rested just beneath his jaw. Her breath was warm against his neck. Her hand slid around his side, fingers curling softly into the fabric of his shirt. No urgency, just closeness, just choice. You haven't asked me for anything, she said. I won't. What if I want to offer something? Only if? It's what you want, he said, voice even. Not because you think it's payment. She tilted her head slightly, looked up at him. Would you still want me? She asked. If I stopped offering anything? I want you if you just stay, he said. If you let the silence be ours. She exhaled, then leaned closer slow. Deliberate until she curled against his side, legs bent, chest against his ribs. Her shirt slipped again at the collar. She didn't fix it. Her arms slid around his waist. Her cheek pressed to his chest. And for the first time, she said it. Without fear. Without condition. I want to stay, Corin. I want to stay because here, I feel like I belong to myself again. He didn't answer with words. He just placed his hand over hers, fingers resting lightly, not gripping, just meeting her there. For the first time in years, they both stopped holding their breath. The morning came without urgency. Filtered sunlight bled in through the upper panel above the bed. A soft amber wash that caught against the curve of Aras's cheek, where it pressed to Corin's chest. Her breath was steady. Her skin was warm. One bare leg curled over his. The old blanket half fell from her back, draped instead across them both. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, her hand resting beneath the hem, where his pulse beat slow and constant. Corin didn't move. He didn't want to. Her weight against him wasn't heavy. It was anchoring. And for the first time in years, there was no voice in his head telling him to get up, to fix something, to brace for the next failure. She stirred only slightly, her hand curling into the fabric above his ribs. You didn't leave the bed, she murmured. No. Why? He breathed once, steady. Because you didn't ask me to. She was quiet for a moment, and slowly shifted upward, placing her forehead to his, noses barely brushing. Corin, she said, I'm not leaving. It didn't sound like a confession. It sounded like a promise, and he didn't doubt her. I know, he said. She leaned back a little, her golden eyes soft with the kind of clarity that comes only after survival. No mask, no fear. Her silver gold hair was tangled from sleep, curling along her shoulders. Her tunic, one she had sewn from leftover work fabric, clung gently to her body, looser around the waist than before. She caught him noticing. "I feel strange," she said. His brow tensed. "Pain?" She shook her head. "No, just wait." She sat up fully and moved his hand, slowly, downward, pressed his palm flat to her lower stomach. Her other hand rested over his. He didn't speak. He felt it. Stillness. Warmth. A pulse, not his. "You're sure?" he asked softly. "I've felt it for 3 days," she said. "At first, I thought it was the stress, the release. But now..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Corin didn't move his hand. "I don't know what to call it," she continued. "It's not a victory. It's not a punishment. It's not something that fixes me." He nodded. "But I'm not afraid," she added. "Not anymore." His thumb moved slightly across her skin. "Not in question confirmation. And you don't have to stay because of this," she said. "I stayed before I knew," he replied. She inhaled shakily and pressed her forehead to his chest again. He felt the last of her defenses dissolve. Number. Tension. No guard. Just Aras, as she chose to be. Later that day, they took the transit rail out past the industrial sectors, beyond the automated freight lanes, out to the edge, where the city thinned and the towers broke into unfinished skeletons. Wind turbines turned lazily on the horizon. Dust swept the paths where old stone met sky. They walked side by side. No words. She wore his jacket, now swallowed in it, but didn't seem to mind. One hand rested low on her stomach as she walked. His hand rested on her back, light, steady. They stopped beneath the long bed power frame, where vines had overtaken steel and birds nested in the joints. It wasn't beautiful, but it was quiet. It was theirs. She turned to him, eyes squinting against the pale light. "You said I didn't have to be anything," she whispered. "You still don't. But I think I want to be something now. Just for us." He nodded once, jaw tight with feeling. She sat first, back against the old steel base. He joined her, pulling off his jacket and laying it over her legs. She let her hands rest over her belly again. His followed, laid gently over hers. There was no rush. No drama. Only beginning. And when the sun broke through the clouds, painting the ruined skyline in dull gold, she looked to him one last time. "Whatever happens after this," she said, "it won't come from fear." "No," Corin said, pulling her closer. "It'll come from here." He pressed her hand over his chest. Her lips parted in a quiet smile. Real, soft, unshaken. And just like that, without any ceremony, without a name or a title to bind it, she was free. He was not alone. And between them, something entirely new had already begun. The end.